and they're coming into lessons only a couple weeks using it. And the parents are like, she's always sore after a few games on the weekend. And this weekend was different. They were like, she looked strong, all 7 innings, and she's not hurting that bad. And I'm like, wow, like, see, that's really good stuff. Take care of your body, throw better.
Hey, this is More Than Velocity. I'm Bart Pear here with Jordan Orseguera and Ryan Croton. And today we have Toni Paisley on the podcast. I'm very excited about this. We love to see what people are doing with the ArmCare app and new ways of using it. And softball seems like a perfect fit, but it's kind of slower to evolve there. We haven't really been pushing it there, which may change. But Toni's got a great background, a great audience. She played softball. Actually, Eastern Carolina, you're in the Hall of Fame there. You've been such a great athlete. Then went on to play pro ball and actually played for the Peru national team as well. And then turned around and took everything you learned and started teaching it to others out there. And it's got a website, teaches online and in person. So Toni, first of all, glad to have you. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and then how you saw this ArmCare thing and got a hold of Jordan.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. I'm definitely really excited, especially super excited before I even talk about me, just being able to help grow the softball community. Baseball, you guys have been doing an amazing job. So here we are trying to push all this really cool stuff to help the athletes. Well, you summed up a lot of it. I'm Toni Paisley. I played softball my entire life. I mean, literally from 9 years old all the way to 28-ish when I played for Peru. I've experienced the highest of the highs, going from a Division I All-American to professional softball. And I've experienced the other side too with injuries, especially with my arm. So it's just really cool and a great opportunity to be able to be here now and help the younger generation avoid some of these things, grow, and just break all the records that we had in the past.
Very cool. Very cool. And so your site's the Softball Pitching Academy. Is that right?
Yeah. So at paisleyspitching.com, it'll lead you into the online training and the in-person training. The Softball Pitching Academy came alive in 2017. So that's been growing pretty cool. And it's how I meet everybody in different countries and states right now.
Cool. And I was on there and I saw you've got a few products. And obviously you were, just before we started recording, you were telling us how you test everything out before you put it up there. Tell me a little more about that, and then we can go into ArmCare.
Yeah, the products right now, I mean, really, I try to keep it simple with pitching. We want easy tools you can use everywhere. In baseball, you guys have been using the weighted balls for so long, and it's something fairly new to softball. So we do the weighted training balls as well. I've got those on the website. They really incorporate really, really well with ArmCare training now. So it seems like a really good fit.
Definitely. And so you reached out to Jordan because you had maybe heard a podcast from us and saw maybe the one with Joe Beimel or something. Tell me more how that came about.
Yeah, so I was with Joe and Brent. Joe was getting ready to throw a little bit, and I saw him over in the corner holding his phone. He had something on his arm, and he was like pushing it into the wall. And I'm talking to Brent, and then I'm getting distracted, and I'm looking at Joe like, what is he doing over there? And so I just asked Brent, and they were kind enough to throw your guys' name out right away, explain how cool the ArmCare device was, and really how simple it is to use. And I instantly just had light bulbs like, oh my gosh, I got to check this out when I go home. I got to see what this is and if it can help, my softball pitchers. So that's how I found you guys. And then I reached out to Jordan and just wanted to talk about how I could, bring this into my in-person instruction. And now I'm hoping I can bring it to the online students as well.
Jordan, what kind of conversations did you have with Toni?
Yeah, so she initially reached out, and me having a huge background in sports outside of baseball, obviously for those that don't know, I don't know anything about anything other than baseball. I'm pretty worthless to society outside of that. But I just thought that she was like some random high school coach calling. I was like, yeah, there's some softball groups using it, kind of walking through. And then I did some research and I'm like, she's in the Hall of Fame. Oh, she played for Team Peru. And I was like, oh, she actually understands what's going on. Then I see all these other lists of technologies that she's using. And you may be one of the maybe 2 or 3 softball groups that are really diving into tech, really doing it the way baseball's kind of done it. You're kind of one of those front runners for it. And I can't really think of other groups that are doing it the way you are. And, you're obviously using ArmCare, but outside of ArmCare, you're using Rapsodo. And that's pretty new in softball. Do you mind going into some of those other techs? I know we've had a ton of talk about technology. So if you don't mind going into that a little bit for the softball realm.
Yeah, there's, like you said, there's only a few of us doing it. And honestly, I think 1, because it's new, 2, because it's scary. A lot of coaches, whether they played or not, it gets overwhelming and they start to think, well, how the heck do I bring this into lessons? Like, I'm not going to understand it. So I think a little bit of both. And hopefully I can bridge that gap for people. But really what I use right now is Rapsodo and 4D motion. We talked about that a little bit. Those 2 pieces of technology are just phenomenal in getting a background of a pitcher, really understanding who she is as an athlete, not just how hard she throws, how she's moving, where we can improve things, her strengths, spin wise, such cool stuff. And those are my favorite products to use. Now we bring in the ArmCare training and I get the entire picture of the athlete. It's been really complementary to each other.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that was so intriguing to me when I first really started getting into more conversations with you about the tech, is that was something Ryan and myself had implemented with the Angels. Was we were doing biomechanical evaluations, not just with 2D video, but we were using 4D. We were using that same tech, and we were evaluating our rotational speeds, our kinematic sequences, what the lead arm was doing, what the glove arm was, the trail arm was doing. And then we're taking that in there. We're using our, TrackMan and Rapsodo and Hawkeye. Obviously, there's a million different technologies out there on the baseball realm. And we're filtering in those pitch shapes and those pitch qualities. And then we're taking in, the way too many, dynamometry systems we had, and we're filtering this in to try to get a good 360-degree view of what's going on with the player. And like I said, there's other groups using Rapsodo, but I really want to stress the point that you're probably the only softball group doing everything that we were doing at the major league level for a softball player. And I think that's really awesome. And I can't understress that enough, that this is kind of cutting edge for a softball industry. Like, people hear this in baseball and they're like, oh, great, they're using all this stuff, but this isn't happening in softball. So if you don't mind, can you go into a little bit of how you use the 4D and the ArmCare and how you merge all those together?
Yeah, so that's why I feel like living on cloud 9 since I got the ArmCare devices, because before I could use the 4D motion. I'm looking at their sequences, even as young as 11-year-olds. We're just kind of getting that picture of them as they develop over the years. So I've got this tool now with the 4D motion. We've been using that for a while now just to see, especially the sequences like you were talking about. It seems to be a huge thing in softball pitchers that's not really talked about. So understanding that now and not having ArmCare, I would look at this, video analysis and thinking, how do I make my own plan to strengthen areas of their body? I'm looking at their shoulder and I'm like, oh, her external rotation and all these things, but I'm not really able to get the complete picture without testing those things. So now I've got the 4D motion. I can see what's going on and visually get a really good look of her entire pitching motion. Then I can pair it with the ArmCare and I can see really what my eye can't see, when I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh, wow, she's way more dominant in internal rotation. This all makes sense now. So not only is it opening up doors for me to create different workout programs and just make them more individualized for each pitcher, but I'm also learning as I go. I'm seeing common issues now that are just making more sense. So it's complemented it really well.
One of the things that I want to just jump in on is that I'm curious, and a lot of the baseball, people that are going to be listening to this podcast, how is softball, as far as pitch counts, and how do you guys manage workloads for pitchers? Because I dated a softball player, and she was a pitcher and a center fielder, and she would pitch like 3 times in a row.
Yeah.
And in the baseball world, to start games 3 days in a row is just like, what?
That doesn't happen.
Yeah. So I'm just curious in terms of like,
unless you're me and your organization's just hoping you get hurt so they don't have to use you, then they just throw you out there all the time.
Yeah. I'm just curious, like, how do people create some kind of a workload schedule? Because when I think about our product, and if this is not happening in softball, we can use this, and this is how we want to be able to use it in baseball, is to individualize these pitch counts. And I would think, especially for a sport that there's going to be consistent overuse day, back to back to back to back, I would think this would be gold.
Yeah, we don't really manage workload that well at all. I remember back in my recruiting days on travel ball, and this is still, what's going on nowadays with pitchers, where I would throw 7 games over a span of a few days. And my adrenaline is just pumped up because I'm seeing the scouts there. And I'm like, oh, I'm just going to keep throwing, I'm doing awesome. Meanwhile, a day or two later, I'm falling apart. And it's just something in softball that's never really been managed. It's questioned from parents more so than anybody else. And they kind of want to know, hey, what's a good pitch count for the week? Nobody really has answers. The common answer that we usually say is, how do you feel? And yeah, that's an important step at first in our world, just to pay attention to how the body feels. But we don't have really good pitch counts. We don't have the studies on the pitch counts to actually say, this is what we're finding. This is what's overuse. This is what's good. So another example, this weekend, I went to go see my pitcher at Iowa. And in college, they're still doing it very similar to when I was there. She threw 3 games, and I think she almost got 3 full games in a row. And these are college games. So they're longer than an hour and a half. It's 2 to 2.5 hours on the field, giving 100% effort to each pitch. And by day 3, I'm just remembering how I felt, where I had like the blisters on my feet, my fingers are falling apart, but we just keep going. So it's not something we manage well, unfortunately, and I'm hoping we can learn a lot from it and just start to make it safer, for the kids growing up, and even make it more competitive for the girls in college. What if they were more fresh? Would they be throwing more no-hitters? I don't know. We might be even better. We might be throwing faster if we recovered better.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much you know about me, but I've researched baseball in a zillion different ways, pitching from biomechanics to the neurological system to cardiovascular stress. Like when I watch girls pitch, and I guarantee, what you're talking about, like no pitch counts and the effort level, like the girls are kind of airborne at certain periods. Like there's a ton of kinetic energy going into their lead leg to block. Like I would assume the amount of fatigue that goes on in a softball pitcher versus a baseball pitcher is not comparable. I would think there's a lot more cardiovascular stress, and you guys are like, you're throwing much more. And, you're looking at the 4D motion, which I think is cool. And I would think, you might want to have some simulated games, in your facility, because I think like the girls' deliveries, if you look in blocks of pitches, let's say 20, it's going to change.
Yeah.
And you're going to see differences in arm leg. You're going to see differences in pronation, all sorts of things that they're going to be doing that, this is unheard of, is to understand this fatigue. And then looking at their post throwing strength, is so essential. I would think myself as a softball coach, like every game, I probably would want to get a pre-throwing exam, and I want to get a post-throwing exam to know, okay, what's my pitcher like coming into the game, and after, tracking the pitches, what is the fatigue level of their arm after the game, and then start to set up a good recovery process. Because like it's just mind blowing. You look at a starter, they're so pampered compared to what happens in your sport. It's like they're not pitching for a bunch of days. There's everybody doing things from massage, acupuncture, cupping, they don't have the competitive stress, like the nervous system, sympathetic nervous system goes down. They don't have to feel like I got to get ramped up again. Like I'm amazed, just how different the sports are.
I have a random thought on that too, is you were talking about how you have this big, huge, like adrenaline dump.
Yeah.
And it's just like day after day after day after day after day. And then you can kind of relax. And you see that happen a lot with a reliever. Once spring training ends and, the rosters are set and you have these guys that are, hey, get up, get loose, and then sit them down in a baseball setting, they get these big adrenaline spikes and then it's done. And it's like, oh my gosh, what do I do? And it's usually not so much even that they're like physiologically fatigued, but it's a lot of psychological fatigue. And then that in turn leads to neurological fatigue and the muscles wearing down. So have you noticed, and I know you haven't been using it for, 5, 6, 7, 8 months, or even through a competitive season, since you guys are just starting it when we're filming this, but have any of your players kind of noticed if they're using it in a travel ball, if they're doing like a test before the tournament and then after, if there is a lot of fatigue going on, or is it still too early to kind of see that?
I think I could almost honestly say we're going to see that, but we haven't tested that yet. So during lessons, we're throwing for 30 minutes, and they're going full effort. They're throwing really hard. They're doing a lot of pitches. But I have a few of the players, and I try to encourage all of them. I'm like, hey, if you're not going anywhere, go take your post-exam. And we can look at those numbers, but it's only been a couple weeks. And a couple of my players, because we're only throwing for 30 minutes, I'm wondering if that's why some of them are stronger after, because it's a short period, almost like when you hit second, third inning and you're feeling really good. So that will also help gauge us, how long lessons and workouts and bullpens should actually be, according with pitch count too. So tournaments and games, I think that's going to be huge to start to test and see how, they feel after. And a whole other subject, well, not another subject, but with the starters and relievers, a lot of times in softball, we don't have that. We have a few pitchers on a team and everybody's a starter. Everybody wants to throw a full game. They try sometimes. Like if you look at the top elite programs, even the top 25 programs in the nation for college, they have the funds, they have the ability to have more than 5 pitchers, and they start to really create a true bullpen like baseball. But with most colleges, even like mid-major and lower levels, those ones have nothing but starters. And we're bred to throw a whole game, stay in as long as you can, try to let the other pitcher not have to throw because we have a game right after. So I think that changes the game a little bit too. And it's just what each staff has, Yeah,
we've talked a lot about the training of starting pitchers and bullpen pitchers from a baseball standpoint. What does the training look like from a softball standpoint? Because again, Ryan and myself, we're coming into softball with fresh eyes, and it's something that we want to learn a ton about. Like you've obviously seen how baseball players train. What's the similarities? What's the differences?
I think there's not that many similarities with rest days and like training days. And like I said, we don't do pitch counts that much. My sophomore year of college, my pitch counts were actually just starting to be paid attention to. And I was actually told to do around 200 to 300 pitches per session. And I went home for Christmas break and I listened. And what do you know, a couple weeks in, I'm starting to hit my elbow on my hip and I partially tore my UCL. So that's kind of my only experience with too much pitching. And now I'm fatigued and I can't throw very well and I'm getting injured. It's more differences than similarities. There's more similarities in like the sequencing and stuff like that, but the workouts are so different. My high school kids right now, for instance, they're throwing overhand or underhand almost every day. They practice Monday through Friday after school. They're doing something almost every day out there. Most of them play other positions too. So if they're not a pitcher, they're a shortstop, and now they're throwing overhand all day. So the workload is extreme. It's completely different. And the recovery process is not talked about enough at all. They're not going and taking care of their arm. They're not doing as many band workouts as they should. They don't have maybe the training team on deck, like some baseball programs. And it's just kind of, I'm going to go on ice. And I'm
Mm.
like, that's not really going to work, So it's new for softball. And then, like you said, there's a few programs where we're really trying to emphasize that, but it's going to be a big push.
Hey,
Man.
Ryan, just to ask maybe a dumb question here, but we look at different ratios and different things we're looking for with overhand pitchers. Would they be the same? You're the biomechanist. That's why I'm asking you. Would they be the same for a softball pitching delivery, or should they be slightly different? I mean,
So
tell me some more about
yeah. So, they also, pitchers have to make overhand throws, if they're fielding the ball and stuff. So they definitely need to have the same balance in their shoulder. But you can correct me if I'm wrong, Toni, but
Yeah.
I think because of the underhand delivery, the injuries, the tendonitis that you guys have are more anterior to the shoulder than posterior behind, because we throw this way. And then we get more stretching in a rotational sense from the back of the shoulder. So that, that's got to decelerate. But from your delivery, I mean, I guess you guys pronate too. Maybe. Yeah. So you probably have the same back of the shoulder soreness.
I was going to say, I've seen more back of the shoulder issues. I see front of the shoulder, soreness. They talk about it, but that seems to recover quicker than any issues back here. Like I've had 12-year-olds with like labrum issues and stuff. Our lats are really, really weak for a lot of pitchers. We don't even understand how to activate them and use them. So really, when you think about pitching and the sequencing, I mean, it's the same thing. It's pelvis, torso, arm. So we're just upside down. It's the same, things though. And like you were talking about earlier, when you talked about force with the landing, that is really, really extreme. So if I look at injuries over my entire career, just being around it, hearing it, and now coaching, usually the injuries first happen somewhere in the front knee or the low back on the landing side. Then they work up here to the throwing shoulder. So those are the three big spots. Landing is obviously a huge issue, and we're going flat ground. So we're creating all of that, torque when we land. So yeah, it's probably pretty similar to the injuries you're seeing in baseball throwers.
Yeah, one of the things that I see in softball, obviously in looking at the deliveries that I think is really important in terms of what we monitor is the scaption strength, because our deliveries, when we separate from the glove, the arm is in a short lever position, right? You guys,
a little higher.
You're long lever throughout the delivery, and so the load that's more on to the supraspinatus and the deltoid is going to be really high. And, that it's weak in baseball players. So I can only assume it's probably going to be relatively weak in softball pitchers. So that's one thing. The other thing I want to ask you, Toni, because we do a grip that's a pinch grip with 2 fingers.
Yeah.
When pitchers throw, do they throw 3 fingers when you're a softball pitcher?
So the ball's bigger, and a lot of times our hands are smaller, which always makes me laugh because I'm like, what the heck? Like, how did this happen? But we use the ring finger a lot for balance. So again, I think the grip strength test is okay because these 2 fingers are really, really prominent in throwing.
Yeah.
But we don't tuck that ring finger. We have to have it there for some balance and a little bit of support. I asked a couple of my lessons to play around with that. I said, hey, do the grip strength with like 3 fingers versus 2. And that ring finger is it just doesn't want to work. So it could be something that maybe is paid more attention to, but I do know throwing, it's just a lot of balance with that finger.
Yeah. And I think about like, where you're talking about lat activation, in my experience, so I've employed a lot of female strength coaches, ones that are upper body strong. They can rip off 15 pull-ups if you get them to, really strong biceps, really strong lats.
Yeah.
But in the general population, I used to train volleyball players. Okay. Also an overhand athlete, females, they struggled so much with any kind of lat pull, integrated the bicep, that I think too, when you're talking about your athletes, 90 holds. Have you ever heard of those where they're, they're basically not trying to pull up, but they're not trying to get themselves up, but they're at 90 holds, that they would need that kind of activation, I'm sure, because we're very pec dominant. We're very pec dominant when we throw. You guys are lat dominant.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting too is a lot of my players, we ask them to roll out and work on the pecs a lot, because we are really, really tight in those areas. So I think the similarities, like you're starting to put together, are really close with a lot of the things. And what we've been teaching with pitchers as of lately, especially since we're understanding the biomechanics better, we're not trying to be so long lever anymore. We're trying to stay closer. We're trying to get the scaps rotating and moving really well. So I think those are also similar too. But when you look at the pitchers and what they're being taught to reach forward with the arms, go to the sky and like reach up. And I'm like, oh no, like we got to get away from those things.
It makes me laugh because those are sadly some of
those are in baseball too.
Like 10 years ago.
Yeah, no, I know what you're talking about, because like turn your hand back this way and go forward. And I'm like, this is why I couldn't throw anymore when I was older.
And here's the funny thing though, is like, so I know me and Toni talked a little bit. My wife played softball. Yeah. And she was a pitcher. She's left-handed. So I guess left-handed pitchers are just as unique in softball as they are in baseball. And when she was in high school and playing all that, everyone had her throwing. And she played at a good sized high school out in Texas, and she would pitch, but she had to stop like her sophomore year because she had so much shoulder problems going on. And everyone says, you can't get hurt when you're throwing to the sophomore.
People still say that.
But there's obviously something that has to happen there. And that's like my wife started doing arm care. And Ryan was talking about Scaption. And when she first started, she couldn't even get the sensor to read, because the Scaption was so weak. But now she's starting to get it to read and do all those things. And she's like, man, I wish I would have had this when I was playing. Like maybe I could have gone to something other than the NAI or the D3 schools and things like that. It's like, maybe I could have played D2 or D1 if I could have just been healthier and stronger. Yeah. And now, like I said, I want to emphasize it again. You're the only person that I'm aware of hammering out biomechanics data of what's going to make a pitcher not only throw harder, but more efficient. Yeah. I haven't heard of that happening in softball, and I've looked into it. Me and Ryan spent too many times trying to find biomechanists in softball, doing all these other things. We can't find them. They're not really out there. So how do I preface this of going like, what are some of those old, I guess, I don't know if you can say old school in softball. What are those old school teachers in softball? Yeah. Your research and what you're finding is kind of saying, hey, this is wrong. And again, we don't know anything about softball. So maybe it's a bad question. No.
It's a great question, because I was one of those old schoolers, because when I first retired from pro, that was 2011. And I was like, hey, I guess I'm going to coach now. Like, let's try this. Let's see how I can coach the kids and see how it goes. I was afraid, like deathly afraid of young kids, because I was on such a high level. I was like, how did I start again? And I was like thinking about those things. But I was an old school teacher for my first maybe 2 years. And then I started looking at the kids and I was like, this is not right. Like, there has to be more than what I was taught. But that's kind of the issue in softball. Most of us that teach only teach what we know. And this is what we were taught back then. So some of the biggest like myths, I guess, or just old school versus new school, was how we used to be taught to point forward with both arms, reach towards your catcher and make this really big circle. Well, a couple years in, I started looking at videos and I was like, we don't throw like that. Like, how come my hand's not turning towards second like they told me to? And it's staying this way when I come down. So I just started asking myself a ton of those questions when I'm looking at my high level throwers, the ones who are throwing really, really fast. I'm like, they don't look like what I'm teaching. So I have to bridge this gap somehow.
Hold on. I'm trying to do that. When you say turn your hand towards second.
Yeah. So we were taught, we used to be taught to go forward, and then it was bring your arm up by your head and rotate towards center field.
So okay, so you come up and then your torso turns.
Yeah.
But this is similar to baseball. Like turn the ball to the outfield, and really activate your pronator back there
Yes.
constantly. Yeah.
So we were taught that there was no whip. Everything was wrist snap. It was come down your circle and snap your wrist at the bottom. So no whip.
I don't know anything about softball, but I guess that doesn't actually happen.
No, I feel so guilty looking back. I'm like, oh, what a bad coach. And then I'm like, no, it's okay. Like, you learn from it. So that's one of the biggest myths, that should not be happening. That should only happen maybe on an off speed or a change up, and you start to rotate early. So the second really, really big myth is throwing without your pelvis and hips, no rotation. We were taught to land completely, we call it 90 degrees, completely sideways. And we were taught to let the arm come through with no rotation. So if you go back to my throwing days, I was taught to brace my core and let my arm come through and stay completely sideways, which we call open. And I think you guys call that
closed. Yeah. If I'm seeing the visual right,
we call that open, because we think about like opening a door and having a clear path for your arm. And now we know that that is so like, just, I don't even want to use the word.
That's like a lesson on how to throw slow, isn't it?
Thank you. Or just how to throw and get injured and tear up your meniscus and all sorts of crap. Like, oh my gosh. So that's how I started my coaching career. I was teaching sideways and long arm. And oh my gosh, it makes me feel bad, but here we are.
So now like the teaching, the current teaching is to get on path with the plate, like shoulders square.
We're trying to be more pelvic driven when we push off. And then we understand the importance of getting open and getting the hips into external rotation. So when you come back into internal, it's that much stronger.
Yeah.
But we're really trying to sequence
real quick, when you say pelvic driven,
you're
talking pelvic, like I'm obviously sitting towards the camera, like pelvic towards the camera, or from a pitching, like a baseball standpoint, pelvic going sideways to the catcher? Because I really have no clue.
No, that's a good question. So we don't start sideways when we throw, we start forward. So we're trying to be pelvic driven, as in you're going forward. So you can reach hip extension first on the initial drive out.
If you're looking at like the pelvis as a bowl, you're trying to bring the bowl facing.
We're trying to tuck. We're trying to
pour the water out behind you. Okay, got it. That makes sense.
But then you start traveling, right? And you're open and you're sideways. I guess for you guys that would be closed. You're sideways, and then it's all about planting. We want to start that rotation before we land to get the foot back towards the catcher, and then be pelvic driven, as in hitting, throwing overhand, all of those sequences where that happens first and it leads the movement.
So at weight, this is so fascinating. So at weight bearing foot flat, when the pitcher, when she's into the ground, the pelvis and the trunk are completely.
No, the trunk should start the rotation after the pelvis.
Okay. So at weight bearing foot flat, you want the pelvis obviously angled to the plate. The trunk for us is going to be slightly closed, and then
us too.
Open.
Us too.
Yeah. Wow. That's pretty cool.
So that's why when we land, it's like the same as baseball. It's just flipped underhand with the arm, but we're still doing the same thing. I mean, if you put it in slow motion, you're watching that elbow come in first, and the forearm and the lower half of the arm should be last.
Yeah.
And one of the things that gets me is you're talking about this wrist flick. And that used to be something in baseball, like really flick that wrist and get it moving. But then we started breaking it down on high speed and understanding that wrist is firm as a board.
Nothing happens until after, the ball comes out. So it is nice to see. You need rotation and everything. You need it to move, but
those are those non-teaches though, right? Because you have your imperatives, which is like, this has to be done. You can teach it. And then you have your inevitables, which no matter what you do, it's going to happen whether you want it to or not.
Exactly.
And that's how it was with the wrist in baseball. And I remember talking maybe a week or two back, and you said, it seems like softball is always trying to piggyback on what baseball was teaching. And then I hear you say some of these things, and I'm like, man, I remember when I was like 8, someone told me, it's like, get that balance point, show the ball to second base, and really get high and keep that arm straight and pull it down through. And I'm like,
or like pointing the glove at your target, point the glove.
It's like, you have guys throwing like scarecrows. I'm like, well, he played at this university. You must know what he's talking about,
My son is 9, and I like to say I don't know much about baseball, but I'm putting the similarities together. And someone told him, that to throw it like that and point. And I was like, oh, I was like angry looking through the fence. Do that. So hopefully I can help him too.
So Toni, you're working with all ages?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I work with, I have in-person instruction. Those are where I see my youngest pitchers, 7, 8-year-olds, which actually now I don't have that many because they've grown up over the years, but 7 to 8 all the way to college. And then the older college kids and college coaches, I consult with them and talk to all of them. So I really try to stay involved on every level, which, keeps me growing mentally and learning.
Very cool. Very cool. So obviously you saw the ArmCare app and the light turned on and said, hey, this could be pretty valuable. How have your players reacted when you've introduced it to them?
So in the very beginning, I mean, they know I love technology. So anytime I bring something in new, they're kind of like, oh, what is she doing again? What's going on here? But with this one, I was so gung-ho on the importance of it before I even started using it with them, where I made it very clear, you guys are going to do this. It's not an option. If you're training with me, I need to have you do your test and I need to have you follow your program, So as a coach, if anybody's eventually watching on the softball side, you just have to make it very firm and clear if you really want to help out the athlete, because there is a big buy-in process, especially on the softball side, because we don't talk about arm care that much. So for them, it's just, oh yeah, just another thing, and they nod their head and they don't do their workouts. But the buy-in, I've been working on that really, really hard. And now for the students, which 90% of them are doing it, I can see, which is really nice. I can look at the back end, and they're coming into lessons only a couple weeks using it. And the parents are like, she's always sore after a few games on the weekend. And this weekend was different. They were like, she looks strong, all 7 innings, and she's not hurting that bad. And I'm like, wow, like, see, that's really good stuff. Take care of your body, throw better. So the buy-in on my end, sure, I had to push them towards it at first, but now when they see the results, I mean, they're begging for it. They want to do it. They're excited to test when they show up, and it's given us a lot of insight.
Fantastic. Well, this has been awesome. I'm so excited about that softball's finding out about this, and
me too.
You seem like just the leader, the perfect person to be introducing this. So, we love that. Jordan, Ryan, you got any further questions?
I got nothing. I thought this was way more insightful probably for me than it was for Toni, because again, I'm coming in with fresh eyes. So
okay, maybe on the softball side.
I know we're gonna have more conversations. Like we're very aligned with you, Toni, the way you're going about your coaching and how you're seeing the athlete holistically. And I just appreciate you teaching us today, and I can't wait to dive deeper into softball.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys. I'm so happy that I was introduced to what you guys are doing, and it's been awesome because it's really, really important. It's one of those non-negotiables. They should be taking care of their body.
Absolutely. So listen, the links to Toni Paisley stuff will be in the show notes here if you're listening to it on wherever you're listening to it. So please go check it out, especially you. I know we've got a lot of families that have their little baseball players, but they've got girls and young ladies out there that are playing softball too. So definitely check it out. And appreciate again you coming on. And until next time, take care.
Yeah, thanks guys.